Please give a warm welcome in the chat to Dr. Reuben Jonathan Miller. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor. It's just really an honor. I was so touched by Jacob's story, of course, and by just the powerful work that Pioneer is doing. It's been a pleasure. I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah, I know we were talking before you came on stage about just how I said, I think we need more pioneers like across the country. And this was your first time learning about Pioneer. I mean, what struck you as you were watching the whole program and hearing about their efforts?
Everything in the literature tells us that people with criminal records need a bridge. So it's not enough to just train, and it's not enough to just get people ready, for example, for the worlds of work or the worlds of housing. So in criminal justice parlance, we might talk about this as human capital development. It's not enough to just develop people's human capital. People need bridges so that they can work their human capital. So they need direct access to employers. They need people to vouch for them, to put their name on them and say, these are good guys. And the literature tells us that when folks do that, employment rates go up, rates of housing instability go down, recidivism rates go down. And so the work that Pioneer does really lines up very closely with the literature on what people with criminal records need.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about your book and the research in just a moment, but I just want to let our audience know that you do have an opportunity to ask some questions of Dr. Miller. To the right of the chat, you should see a Q&A tab. You can put your question in there, and there's a way that you can vote up a question that you really want him to answer, and then we will choose some of the more popular, maybe at least one or two of the more popular questions throughout this conversation. So go ahead and put your questions in if you have them or as they come up in the Q&A portion on your screen to the right of the chat. So, first of all, Dr. Miller, I was really struck by your title. I always like to talk about, because I'm sure you had a lot of iterations of what you should call this book that captures really what it's about. And you called it Halfway Home. Tell us about why you chose that one and what it means for you.
Thank you for this question. I was struck by how many different ways through our law and our policy we make it so that people never find their way home. There are 45,000 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that target people with criminal records. We call these collateral consequences, something like 19,000 labor market restrictions. This is what I was saying, like the work of Pioneer is so powerful, 1,000 housing restrictions. And what we've done is we've made it so that people get stuck. And they get stuck in part because of decisions. People make bad decisions, absolutely. But once they've made a decision to change their lives, we have a policy regime that says there's no place for you. We've made it so that there's no place for people. And so Halfway Home reflects that it's both about being stuck. And then the other side of that is I spent many years in places like Pioneer, both residential drug treatment programs, prisoner reentry programs, halfway houses also. And so it's also in some ways a play on that, the idea that people will meet you halfway and offer support halfway. It's the place where people are, and it's also the place that reflects what they need.
Beautifully articulated. Thank you for that. And I just want to slow down on one piece of what you said, because I want people to take this in, people who haven't read your book. I remember reading, I think it is towards the beginning, and you talked about how many laws are on the books just to make it difficult for people to re-enter society. And I'm sure there are certain states that are worse than others. But can you give us that number again? Because when you put that in writing, I was like, wow. And I know from working with people who have left prison that, one slip up in their back, I used a phone, I did this, I had a dog, whatever it was. Can you just help us take that in a minute?
Absolutely. When I wrote the book, there were 45,000 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that target people with criminal records, regulating where they can go, with whom they might live, how they might spend their time. And just to emphasize one additional statistic, when we think about the importance of work, there are 19,000 labor market laws, policies, and sanctions, over 19,000. So in my state of Illinois, for example, they're well over 500. The devil's always in the empirical details. But when you consider access to business licenses and property rights in my home state, that number goes from over 500 to over 900, about 960. And so state by state, there will be nearly 1,000 labor market regulations. But there are other laws that I wanted to make sure that we think about too. When you leave prison, you get handed something called conditions of release. These are laws on top of laws. These aren't codified laws in any jurisdiction, but they're things you must do and things you may not do that are just for you and for everyone who walks out of that place. And those laws might say things like, you may not cross state lines while you're on probation. You may not associate with, for example, known offenders. And this is a big problem because we forget that these are human beings. And so if you've been in a cage for 10 years, the people who you did time with have helped you. You formed family, you formed friendships. And we hand you a sheet of paper that says, on top of the 45,000 laws, if you talk to your bunkie, your cellie, your rappy, you'll go back to jail or prison. And this is something that we have to think very carefully and critically about if we want to make sure that the world is a better, safer, more just place.
Wow. So it's like you put people in prison, separate from family. A lot of situations make it difficult for you to see your family. And then when you get out, now let's, basically not have that family. It's just, you're right. I love that you said keeping in mind the humanity, that they're human beings. I love that. For those who have not read your book, I'm just showing it once again, can you just give us an overview of your research? Because as I understand it, you started as a chaplain, right?
That's right. I was a volunteer chaplain. So, and this was from 2003 to 2008, I was a volunteer chaplain at the Cook County Jail. And, I'm a religious guy, obviously, and so I was moved by scripture. And in the middle of the scripture, there's a question that the Most High asks of the people who follow him or love him or care for the Most High, however we see them. And the question is, when I was sick and in prison, did you visit me? This follows, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? And this, when I was sick, did you visit me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? And it moved me. So I went to the Cook County Jail to work with people who were visiting folks who were incarcerated. And I did that for about 5 years. And while I was there, I started seeing people from my neighborhood because I was born poor and Black after 1972. This is the year that mass incarceration begins in earnest. So from 1972 to about 2008, we incarcerate more people at a greater rate. So we moved from about 300,000 people in American jails and prisons to well over 2 million. And so I'm doing this work at the height of this moment. So that was my entree. That was my introduction. It was meeting people. It was hearing their stories. It was learning about the way they experience loss, about how they deal with the separation from their family. And also helping people through their own sicknesses, the death of their loved ones. This is how I met people in their worst time, offering care in that way.
Because as a chaplain, you get access perhaps that some other people can't. They may not have those same access points. So it was your faith that kind of led you there. And then that was the spark that led you into doing more research. So can you give us a bird's eye view of that?
Absolutely. So I thought this is what I wanted to do for a living. I said, hey, I want to be a chaplain. I love this work. And I went to social work school to learn clinical skills because I realized I would talk to people about their religion and their spirituality. But what they most needed was material support, housing, jobs, substance abuse treatment, help to reunite with family members that they had been separated from. So when I see guys on the outside, for example, they talk to me about, having trouble reconnecting with their children. And I wanted those clinical skills. So I went to go become a social worker because I wanted to be a really good chaplain. And when I got to social work school, I got confronted with the literature on mass incarceration. Mm-hmm. And it raised a new set of questions for me. And so then I started to study it. And so I decided not to be a chaplain just because I changed my mind.
You're allowed to do that.
You're allowed to do that, right? Absolutely. Everybody gets a second, third, fourth chance to figure out their life. And so this is one of my chances. Anyway, so I decided to do a PhD and study mass incarceration as a sociologist to better understand it. Well, while I was in the middle of this research, while I was doing this work, my brother was incarcerated. Now, I had known people who had been locked up before, and my brother had been locked up in different ways, before. In fact, two of my brothers had been to jail or prison. But also while I was doing this work, I met my father for the first time. I was in my late 20s at this time, and learned that he had been incarcerated for about 20 years. And the reason for this is simple. I was born poor and Black after 1972. I couldn't have avoided the prison if I wanted to. It follows you. It's like a ghost. I didn't start studying mass incarceration because I had family members who were incarcerated. I had family members who were incarcerated because the prison is a giant force in the life worlds of all Americans. 1 in 2 Americans have a loved one who's been to a jail or prison. This includes 1 in 8 current white American women have a loved one who is right now in an American jail or prison. And so this is a giant American problem that we have to wrestle with. And so I decided to do that through my research as well as through my practice.
So you went into the research, and I love how you followed your curiosity and your passion the whole way. Was there something you expected to find when you got there? And then what did you find that maybe surprised you?
Well, what I found was people made dynamic lives for themselves, both on the inside and especially on the outside. And this was despite all of the constraints that they faced. There was something beautiful about this. I'd watch mothers parent their children 15 minutes at a time through collect phone calls. Mm-hmm. And while that was tragic, I saw the effort and the initiative that they put into every phone call, all those phone calls. I watched grandmothers pool money together with friends and family so that they could mount a legal defense for a grandson who was in trouble. I watched people go almost bankrupt, paying for those calls, paying for that attorney, paying for that food that they'd send, ramen noodles or snacks, honey buns, et cetera, that cost twice as much on the inside as it does in the free world. But I watched the resources that they figured out how to pool together to support the person that they loved most and the great lengths that they took to do that. And I watched men find their family while in prison, men and women. And I watched men and women lose their families while they were in prison. And I was struck by the fullness of life that we see. And I was struck by the deep humanity that I found at every moment, whether those were moments of suffering or moments of joy.
So many stories. And I think that's what I particularly love about this book is you kind of give us a window into each person's story. And I think the one that stood out to me was Yvette. And, 10 years after her incident, facing, not being able to keep her job, 10 years later. And also the piece, I don't remember the exact percentage, but this high percentage, well over 80% of women incarcerated victims of some kind of sexual violence. And so that's a story that stays with me. When you think about all the stories, are there ones that stay with you?
Yeah, many stay with me, but the one that stays with me, that gives me great hope, is the story of my dear friend, Ronald Simpson Bay. And of course, Yvette's story. Like Yvette is a powerhouse. She's anyway. Yvette is a dear friend, and I just love her. And so is my dear brother Ronald. But tell you about Ronald. He was wrongfully convicted. Now most people in my book are quote guilty. Like most people, were incarcerated for things that they did. In this case, Ronald wasn't, and so he was incarcerated for shooting at a police officer. He wasn't at the scene of the crime. There's a whole the book walks through it, and they give him 50 years, and he serves 27 years of that 50-year sentence. And somewhere in the middle of that sentence, his son gives him a call and says he's going to come meet him. It's Father's Day. It's in the 2000s, and his son is murdered. His son is murdered by a 14-year-old boy. Ronald is about 16 or 17 years into his sentence. Ronald decides that the child a 14-year-old boy kills his son. He decides that the 14-year-old boy, who the state of Michigan was going to charge as an adult, shouldn't be charged as an adult, should be charged as a juvenile so he can get a second chance, so he can reimagine and reinvigorate his life so that he could become something productive. And I wondered why. Why would you do that? If someone killed my boy, I would hate them. Mm-hmm. I would, And I wondered if he loved him. Did you love this child? No, he didn't love the child. but he made a decision. He decided it was the right thing to do. That boy suffering for the rest of his life wouldn't bring his son back. And he made a decision from an ethical place, not a place of good feeling, not a warm and fuzzy, not a place of charity, but he made the decision because it was the right decision. And so he decided that boy who killed his son, who harmed him, who he had reason to hate, who he had reason maybe to fear even, deserved a place in the world, deserved to belong. And that sticks with me because I remember at the end of the day, we're talking about human beings, even people who caused us harm, even people who've committed violent offenses, that these people deserve a place in the world because they're human beings and because they are fully human participants in our human community. And our job then is to make a world in which people belong, even people who've caused us harm. That's what I take from Ronald, and that stays with me.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And, our words matter. And I think about how often people want to use words like monster. And I notice in the book, you use cages to talk about prison. Our words matter, don't they? And how we talk about people. And it's not always about a feeling, but about our values.
I think so. I think words absolutely matter. I mean, I use cages in the book because I think people are held in cages. I mean, when I go to a prison, I see, the doors slide and close, the doors lock. If you're behind bars, I think it's accurate to call it a cage. So on the one hand, I think it's accurate. On the other hand, I think we use language like prisoner, inmate, felon, convict, because those words are shorthand for things that we're afraid of. It's shorthand. So I try to be accurate, but I also try to be respectful. I try to use person-centered language. So if I talk about somebody with a criminal record, I say someone with a criminal record. Now, this isn't for me a hard and fast rule, but it's my ethical decision that I want to respect. I'm going to do everything I can, and this is one way that I try to respect the humanity of the people who I've spent so much time with.
Gotcha. We have a couple of great questions in the Q&A that I want to bring out to you. Someone said, this is from Mac, thank you. What can individuals do to deal with employers still reluctant to hire individuals with records of victimless crime, unquote?
Yeah, I think two things. I think partnering with organizations, as Pioneer does, for example, that will hire formerly incarcerated people, and showing them the efficacy, showing them that every study that's been done on this population shows no increase in crime. In fact, every study, any criminologist worth their salt will tell you that access to employment reduces crime, reduces violence. And so if employers respond to data, then reveal the data. The other thing that have happened are experiments where, for example, college campuses have decided, hospitals, et cetera, have decided to hire people with criminal records. And what they reported is not only do people with criminal records not commit more crime or additional crime or different amounts of crime than, say, members of the general public. In other words, if you're worried about danger, there's just as much danger from everybody else walking around in the world. But also that those employers are great employees, right? So they're happy to work. They show up on time. They do the thing when trained. When a service provides the access to the kinds of things they need so that they can be good employees. So in other words, sharing the stories of the successes, I think, might go a long way.
All right, perfect. Thank you. One other question. Does your research indicate any one most important support that formerly incarcerated people need? And is there any difference in that one thing might be by race or sex?
So I'm going to answer this question the best way that I can, because I don't know that there's one thing. Yep. I think the thing that we have to remember is that these are human beings. So all the things that you need are the things that people with criminal records need. So what do we need? What do we all need to thrive? This point that you raised earlier, I mentioned. Well, what do we all need to thrive? We need deep connection with our families. We need support to have those connections. We need to be able to feed ourselves and to contribute to the worlds in which we live. We need to be able to participate civically. So if I approach this question from an ethic of care and from an ethic of hospitality, from a place of belonging, where I say, what does someone need to thrive? if they're anyone, criminal record or not, then once those things are provided, that person will indeed thrive. So all the things we know in literature, housing, substance abuse treatment, connections with family, consequently, the law breaks all those connections the way they're written. And so we need to revisit these things so that people might indeed thrive.
And on that note, because I think what I'm getting from these questions, people are here because they want to help. They know they want to make a difference. And when you think about your years of research and the stories that you've encountered, what can individuals do? Like what else you've mentioned about being able to tell the success stories. That's one. Anything else that individuals can do to support reentry? And just simple steps that we can take?
There are 1,000,005 things. I'll say three. So thing one is to pay very close attention to the people that you're voting for. Local politics matter much more than I think we give credit for in the public discourse. We tend to pay attention only to federal elections, but it's really that DA. It's really folks at the level of city council, aldermen, the ward. This thing really matters. The mayor. These things really, really matter because they make decisions at the local level where there's lots of power and autonomy. That's part one. Part two is to support organizations like Pioneer. This is incredibly important. Support organizations like Pioneer that do this good work, that broker connections. If you're an employer, the best way to help somebody with criminal record is to employ people with criminal records. And one great way to do that is to connect with organizations that have a track record of success so that you can figure out how best to incorporate people who have some challenges into your workforce. And the last thing is in the place of housing. Advocate for housing. Housing matters. If you don't have a house, you can't keep a job. Or it's very hard. If you don't have a house, it's very hard to stay connected to your family. Instability breeds trouble. And so what we want to do is we want to draw strong lines to stabilizing resources. We want to connect resource poor people to resource rich institutions. This is the way out. This is the way out.
Love that. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Last thing is the felony record expungement, sealing of records, pushing so that people aren't held accountable for things they've done 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago that have nothing to do with the job or the house or the things they're trying to do in their lives now.
Anything else you want us to know today?
I think that what this organization is doing focuses on the humanity of these precious people. These are human beings. We see that in Jacob's story. You'll see that in a million stories throughout my book. If we just remember that these are our brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, our loved ones, and not some stranger lurking in the dark to harm us, that these are people we know, love, and care for. If we live our lives in that way, govern in that way, make decisions about who we hire, who we spend time with, who we lease apartments to, this kind of thing, we'll have a better, more just, and more safe world.
We are so grateful for your voice, and we're grateful that you took the time to be with us today. And where can people find your book? I know that was a question in the chat. Is it online, widely available?
It's widely available. It's where all bookstores are sold. Certainly Barnes & Noble, it's on Amazon. It's in every indie bookstore can get their hands on it.
Yeah, well, you just keep following your curiosities and your passions because no telling what you'll come up with next.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Miller.